Hi there, it's Gabrielle Nicolay from the Complicated Kids podcast, and today I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Shoshana Levin Fox. Dr. Fox is a child psychologist, play therapist, and autism specialist, and she is the author of an autism casebook for parents and practitioners, The Child Behind the Symptoms, which you said you wanted to name the book that, but they made me put
100%.
autism in the title. So
100%, Gabrielle.
it's very evocative. Why did you write this book, Dr. Levin?
Oh gosh.
I'm going to keep calling you Dr. Levin, by the way. Dr.
No, you can call me Shoshana. I'm much more comfortable with Shoshana, Gabrielle.
Perfect. Thank you.
More. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for this opportunity to speak with you and share all this passion, as they say these days, but for sure. So why did I write the book? For 25 years, from 1990, my career spans more years than I care to admit to, but I'll admit to the 25 that I spent at the Feuerstein Institute with Professor Reuven Feuerstein from 1992 to 2017. It's 25 years, that's like a generation, where I was responsible for assessing and treating children who had been diagnosed, most of them elsewhere, as autistic. And Gabrielle, I was finding that a huge percentage were not genuinely autistic. And I felt that there was such an incredible disservice being done to these children. Mm-hmm. The impact on the parents is usually sometimes, well, it's difficult mm-hmm. and often traumatic. And if it's accurate, one can live with it, and let's get down on the floor and let's do DIR floor time and let's go and let's get this child moving forward. But I was finding, Gabriella, that a huge percentage, and I do mean huge, from my perspective, had been misdiagnosed using conventional means. So I wanted to share with parents in particular, but also practitioners, what I consider, in a sense, kind of an expose. So it's just been very important for me to share what's the misdiagnosis of these children.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off because this is a very controversial statement you're making here, right?
Oh,
which is which is autism actually isn't as common as we think, in essence, right? And understanding that it is more complicated than that. Autism exists. We want to treat it like this is right. We're all on the same page here. But what are the things that you were seeing that was making you think, and I'm going to jump in here with my own view, first of all, which is we're using behaviors to diagnose a brain difference or disorder. We're using behaviors to tell us about what brains are doing, which is a measure, but it's not the most reliable measure that we've ever had. In other words, behaviors happen for a myriad reasons, right? Mm-hmm. So what is it that you were seeing in these diagnoses that wasn't matching or didn't belong? How did this work for you?
Well, first of all, we have to take a step back and take a look at the big picture. And the big picture, and I know there's a lot of controversy, perhaps about just about everything I've been saying. Mm-hmm. But I want to say as a preface, Gabrielle, the children were changing. So we must have been doing something right.
Okay.
Beyond expectation, beyond parental expectation, beyond what the other reports were claiming about the child. So something in our perspective, something in our way of working at the Feuerstein Institute must have been right because we were seeing real changes. So if we step back and we take a look at what's happened to this diagnosis. In 1943, and I know a lot of people have trouble with Kanner, I don't, because I think he nailed it. There were two very compact criteria for autism: extreme emotional cutoffness and an obsessive insistence on sameness, like rituals and circuits, and have to go to nursery school the same way every day, or we get screaming fits and so on. Okay, that's really, that for me, that's tight. And for me, that indicates that he was talking about rather extreme developmental condition. Mm-hmm. We now have, to my great sorrow, a spectrum. Now, I realize it was done so that more children would get services, and that's important, but at what price? So we now have in the DSM-5 a range of symptoms. And when you have a range of symptoms in your diagnostic criteria, I'm sorry to say, you no longer have a diagnosis. You have an elastic thing that stretches to fit just about any child, and these days, just about any adult. So that's one point.
So
Do you
keep going. Yes. And,
Okay.
and the DSM, by the way, the use of the DSM, the historically inappropriate use of the DSM is like a whole other topic for
That's
another
right.
day, right? Because we're now using this document that was never intended for
That's
the purposes, multiple purposes that we are now using it. So that's like a whole other thing about
Right.
lots of different things,
With
right?
you on that.
Beyond the scope.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So maybe the DSM has been inappropriately used and isn't useful for these symptoms because it's a collection of symptoms that we can't really diagnose a disorder from. Okay, what else?
Right. But it's taken like the gospel truth. And you can have I'm thinking of 3 different young children that I saw recently in the last few weeks, each one completely different. Each one has been given an autism diagnosis. And in my perspective, using the very tight criteria, we did not use the DSM-5 at the Feuerstein Institute. I got down on the floor and I'm playing with the children using DIR floor time as both a treatment approach and as an assessment approach. And it worked. We got so much developmental information about the children that enabled me to say, this is nonsense. This child is not cut off. This child is not obsessively obsessively insistent upon sameness. This child has a social communication problem. There were so many other problems that I find this autism spectrum diagnosis, and if you want some more controversy, here comes. I think it's a terrible diagnosis. It has no, in my perspective, no clinical meaning. However, the impact on parents is profound. I'm not talking about the practical side. You can get your speech therapy and you can get your services. Okay, let's put that aside for a minute. But the impact on parents is profound. The impact on most professionals, when you get a report that says, oh, autistic spectrum disorder, it's like, oh, okay, wow. And then you kind of see the child through the lens of the diagnosis, but you're not really seeing the child. What gets buried under this elastic one-size-fits-all diagnosis? The individual child's strengths. We were a very strength-based team, very, and we got results. Children changed profoundly, many of them disproving the diagnosis, and the child's particular weaknesses that might be accounting for their problem. And if you want, I can give you some examples of the kind of things that I often saw were misdiagnosed. They fit the DSM-4 or 5, but that's not saying anything.
It's so interesting. Okay, so
because it's elastic.
This is fantastic.
It's elastic.
Okay, so and let's get into the more interesting part of this conversation, which is, I mean, look, diagnosis, again, a whole other conversation. But let's get into what I love to talk about, and I suspect what you love to talk about, which is what happens to children when we use a strength-based approch, when we use diagnostic treatment or therapeutic diagnosis. That's a bi-directional process, right? What happens to kids with brain differences when we meet them where they are, use a relational-based approach, a play-based approach, a developmental approach? So tell me all the things that happened give me the examples now, because this is where the fun part starts.
Okay. The not fun part might, Gabrielle, the not fun part might be, I know it's widely accepted that there are brain differences.
Mhm.
Uh-oh, you're talking with someone who doesn't buy into that.
Oh, good. Oh,
No.
say.
Oh, no.
What does that mean?
So,
There's not brain differences.
in other words, there's a whole, it's understood
Mhm.
by most people these days, professionals and parents, that my child, I hope you don't get hate letters after this, but I hope that parents will tune in, because if you can hang on here, you can see that there is just so much that could be done for children.
Mm.
Yes, there are correlational studies, but of course, that's not the majority. It's not an assumption on my part that the child that I am facing necessarily has a different brain, may have different developmental problems.
Mhm.
Don't forget, working with Professor Feuerstein, who you may not have heard about, but he was a genius, really a genius. We believed, basic to his whole way of working with people, children and adults with special needs, was that the human brain is changeable.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
We know
Yes.
that. We know
Yes.
that. So in other words, I'm not worried about the brain, I'm worried about the kid.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not worried about the brain. I know that children are changeable. If
Yeah.
you see their strengths, we call them islets of normalcy. Now, some people go,
Say
oh
that
no,
again.
there's no
What do you call them?
islets.
Islets.
Islets, like little tiny islands of
Okay.
normalcy,
Oh,
and the
islands.
whole sea of symptoms.
Yeah.
And then the whole, do you want a few examples of what
Yeah.
that might be?
Sure.
Okay. I just happen to have,
Perfect.
what a coincidence. For example, well, there's just so many. So I'm watching the child play, I'm interacting with the child either on the floor or at the table. I've had the referral material, and it says DSM-4, DSM-5 in my career, autistic, and I got so used to seeing children that were misdiagnosed, I'd say, okay, I'm going to meet this child. I'm going to put that aside, take it with a grain of salt. Let's see what it is all about. So an islet of normalcy, or you can think of it as islet of competency, or you can think of it as the anti-symptom, the non-symptomatic part of the child, which is what you want to just breathe oxygen into. And then guess what? The kid gets stronger, and the symptomatic stuff just kind of fades in many cases. So warm eye contact, more frequent eye contact, expressive eye contact, evidence of reciprocity, turn taking, little bit of imitative behavior, the tiniest interest in relationship, warmth, humor, expression of emotion. There are gazillions of them. And it's important what happens when children are, I've probably seen thousands in that 25-year period, and I'm continued to see them now. And it's heartbreaking to see how professionals zero in on the problem areas, which are important to see, and lose sight of the fact that if you breathe oxygen into those strengths, then you can more than compensate for the child's weakness. So you want a specific example? There are many more, but in other words, it's the things that are not considered symptoms. They may be autistiform and not autistic, having the form of autism, but not the essential cutoffness and sort of developmental frozenness typifies what I consider a genuine autism.
That's so interesting. Some of this comes down to semantics and what we believe and what we don't believe and what we know. And some of it is, and I'll go back to my previous comment, which is like, we're using external behaviors. And again, we should, particularly in treatment, we want to know what kiddo is interested in, how they respond, right, on the outside to what's happening. And there's also an internal neurological, neurobiological process happening that isn't necessarily visible or apparent to us. And so that just, it gets interesting for me in terms of like, okay, what are the neural mechanisms that are creating this person? And to your point, how do we strengthen, stabilize, augment, actualize, whatever word we want to use, right? Those, what did you call them? You called them something about anti-symptoms or something.
The anti-symptom, the islets of normalcy or competency.
I love that idea of the anti-symptom. Like,
absolutely,
find the thing that's really going well and
absolutely.
stretch that.
That's right.
And then leverage
And also
that.
don't discount it. Don't discount it. Because that I often see the child, those aspects of the child get discounted, and all of a sudden he's autistic, whatever that would, for me, I'm sorry, that no longer has meaning because it's the diagnosis is elastic. So you can't do that with developmental stuff. You can't have an elastic diagnosis, which we currently do. So it's interesting. Where I go with that, Gabrielle, is not, I don't think about the neuro or brain or anything. I think, what can I do with that?
Yeah.
I put on my DIR floor time hat and I say, what can I do with this to change this? Because I know if we want to talk brain, the human brain is changeable. It's changeable. So I'm not going to worry about the child is changeable because he's a human being.
Yeah.
This far, we don't know. But we're not going to decide on the basis of a diagnosis that the child will never do .
Well, now that is an interesting point, right? So, and this is where, again, this whole diagnostic process gets really tricky because we hand in a desire to code somebody for something that's happening, that's going wrong developmentally or whatever is different. We hand somebody a diagnosis and then they do the work and society does the work of codifying now what that's supposed to mean for them. Oh, they're going to be non-speaking. Oh, they're going to not be able to live on their own. Oh, they're going to, and I think, is that what you're talking about? Kind of that it's baggage that comes with it, right?
Oh, it's terrible. It's very destructive
for parents. And that
harms parents. It harms parents.
Yeah. And
it harms the child.
We spend, I just want to say for one second, over at Raising Orchid Kids, we do spend a fair amount of time pointing out the difference between the label and the child, and the fact that the label doesn't tell you anything about prognosis.
That's right.
And right. So prognosis is driven by what we see in treatment, progress that we see, change that we see, and what you're I hear you saying very much the same thing. Yeah.
I completely agree with what you're saying. The whole idea that the diagnosis then becomes the child's identity and destiny, and that is just so untrue. And I'm saying that on the basis of experience, not on the basis of wishful thinking. My colleagues and I
that's right.
worked in this way, a positive strength-based approach, using play to assess what to do with it. I'd love to give you an example or two.
Yeah. And then actually, I'd like you to go back and clarify for the folks who don't know, DIR floor time. Explain just a little bit about that. That's a whole other conversation too.
You're also trained in it, I noticed. Yeah,
I have some training in it. Yes, I'm not certified. I have a yes. I'm familiar.
Yeah. Okay. Let's think of an example of sort of looking. I'm thinking of an example of looking for. Oh, okay. This was really an exciting one. I did put it in the book. I'll call him Ernie. We're talking about a child who came to me a week before his 7th birthday. Birthday number 7 was brought by his caregivers because for various reasons he'd been removed from the home because his parents were not able for various reasons to care for him. And the caregiver said, we really feel this child has more in him and we really feel that he's intelligent. Okay, so here's what happened. I received the referral material. It's 2:00 in the afternoon and I'm reading a huge report. I believe it was in Hebrew, which is even tougher. And and it's 2 PM and I'm tired and I'm reading this. And according to, at the time, it was a DSM-4, and this highly respected expert in autism who works conventionally. I do not, haven't, and never will. Had said this is autism. This is clear and absolute certain autism, and he probably is mentally retarded. And I'm thinking, you know what I'm thinking at 2 PM? I'm tired. This is going to be hard. And I tell you, Gabrielle, I opened the door, and this gorgeous strawberry blonde little guy with bright shining eyes looks at me like, hey, this is a new place. Wonder what's going to happen here. So what have we got right away from those first 10 seconds? Anticipation, emotional investment, appropriate curiosity. Does the child speak? Barely. He had maybe, I think not even a 10-word vocabulary, according to his caregivers at the time. Did he have some autistic looking features? Yeah, he was flapping. Okay. So I had some toys in the room, and I just want to give you a feel for how this perspective works, because it impacts on every aspect of clinical practice when you toss aside the conventional kind of rigidity that unfortunately is out there. And had some toys. I'd seen him in the waiting room, so I'd sort of picked out some toys I thought might interest him. He looked, but he didn't play with anything. I thought, okay. I signaled to his caregivers, so let's let him be. Let him acclimate, let him kind of feel his way. Not much happened, and I pulled out a picture dictionary, a beautiful colored picture dictionary, and I sat down at my desk. I don't think I even turned it in his direction. And I'm looking at the pictures, and I said, car, tree. And lo and behold, he came up to the desk, showed some curiosity, and started to point to the pictures and name some of them. Then right away, we know that this non-speaking child has the capacity for language. All right. And he's got some smarts up there because he can identify these pictures when he feels relaxed. So I thought, good. So I said, this wasn't the floor time. That wasn't really floor time, but basically reading the situation, there's a lot more in this kid than meets the eye. Not to mention that he'd already completely touched my heart with his gorgeous, bright, shiny eyes. So I sat him down at the table, little table, and I brought out some 3-dimensional wooden puzzles. They're unique to the Feuerstein Institute. The professor developed them. Basically, it's a wooden puzzle of several parts that fits together, and then you have to construct the frame around it, the wooden frame around it. I took one apart, it's one of the simplest ones, put it on the table, and just gestured to him like, your turn. And he didn't have a clue what to do with them. Okay, so I modeled for him. I said, this goes here, this goes here, this goes here, and that goes inside and then here and here. It's like a sandwich. Okay, your turn. I took it apart, and he did it. No problem.
Right. And but now, more than that, right. But I'm going to stop you there because, because now
I have to tell you more.
Okay, go ahead.
I have to tell you more. I told you ahead, Gabrielle, it's going to be hard for you to stop. So, but more than that, first of all, so right away I think, what borderline retarded? What?
Correct. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Right. What retarded
impairment here?
What retarded? Did this expert play with this child? Did she engage him at all? If you don't engage the child in your assessment, you have not assessed the child. You have to engage them. So that day, and then he says to me, flapping his hands and rocking back and forth, and yes, that looks autistic. And yes, it was a symptom of autism, but he had so much more in him. And he's saying, more, more.
My favorite.
More.
Yeah.
So you got it.
Yeah.
So I'm realizing inside this child that's been thought to be mentally retarded and autistic is this incredible hunger to learn.
Yep.
Okay. He did that day, that afternoon, it was at least a 2-hour session, 20 of those puzzles of increasing difficulty.
Wow.
I vowed at the end of that session, I turned to his caregivers and I said, I will do everything in my power to help get this child out of the this happened to be a terrible special kindergarten where he was. Got him integrated for 2 years at the age of going on 9. He was in kindergarten, a regular kindergarten with an angel of a, he made wonderful progress. He made wonderful progress. So that's an example how you take, if I just said, well, he's autistic, yeah, he's flapping and he's rocking back and forth, end of story, keep him where he is, that's fine. No, get in there, get involved.
There's a term in the field, I'm sure you've heard it, presumed competence.
Okay, sure.
And that to me, when I think about, number one, when I think about kids, I'm thinking about, right, who are they in this world, right?
Yes.
What are they going to show me? What are we going to give to each other here when I'm going into a session? Nice. I can tell you do this too. So there's that. And then there's the piece where I, as the clinician now, get to presume competence on the part of the child. If I do that, when I do that, now I have taken the lid off of the box and
That's
they
right.
get to do whatever it is that they're capable of. And I am
Fantastic.
Obviously setting out the just right challenge, right? And seeing if they can meet it. If not, we adjust the challenge, right? And so it's this constant back and forth. I call this, for lack of a better term, a special sauce. And
a special sauce?
A special sauce on the part of the clinician. The ability to
nice.
presume competence, to structure a task in a way that is accessible and interesting to the child, that elicits their best.
You bet.
And it's a process, and the neuroscience is so interesting around this. I know you know, just in terms of like how, when one is well regulated, one has access to certain skills. And when one is dysregulated, one does not have access to certain skills, and which is exactly what you're doing in this session. Everything that you've just described to me is I attuned to the child. I let him lead I gave him some invitations and then allowed him to lead. And I presumed competence and just kept seeing what else could happen.
That's right.
That functional, relational, play-based approach is going to serve him, and did serve him, it sounds like,
yes,
way better. And I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I'm just trying to draw it out for the audience here. Way better than this flat, one-dimensional number on a piece of paper.
100%.
Yeah, there you go.
100% with you.
Oh my gosh. And we could talk about this all day, but I'm going to be mindful of the time. If people want to find your book, how do
Amazon.
they do that? Amazon.com?
Yeah, Amazon.com, an autism casebook. And if they want to contact me, they can contact me through my website, Shoshana Levin Fox, like the animal.com. And
perfect. And how do you work with people? Yeah, how do you work with people now?
Most of my time actually is spent in my play therapy practice, which is a different kind of hat that I wear.
Yep.
And I see children face to face.
Okay.
I'm doing some Zoom consulting.
Okay.
Yeah. And if I feel it's a situation where I can see the potential in the child through some of the videos that I've gotten, I usually try to get the parents. I consider DIR floor time practitioners safe hands. Okay. Because they're working developmentally. Yeah. If they're working with the child, they're working with the child's uniqueness, and I'll refer them maybe to the ICDL site or something like that. So if it's something that I feel that requires more than 2 or 3 Zoom meetings or something and say, look, let's get you someone in your area that can do this kind of thing and bring out the best in your child. So,
Perfect. Perfect. Oh my gosh. There's so much we didn't get to, but we'll just have you back and do it then.
okay. Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
so much
Marianne.
for being here,
Thank
Shoshana.
you.
It was a
Pleasure
pleasure.
to meet you. I've been following your posts on LinkedIn for a long, long time, and it's a
And
pleasure to meet you.
me as well. This is a mutual admiration society here. So thank you for being here.
Okay, wishing you good success. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.